Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this very important webinar on the amendment of the National Disaster Management Act 2005. On behalf of the National Institute of Disaster Management, I express my gratitude to all the delegates who have joined today. As today is the Saturday, and they must be having a lot of pressure at home also, because these days the support system is not there. But despite this, you have been able to actually join. I'm really grateful, and on behalf of the National Institute of Disaster Management, I extend my heartfelt thanks to all of you and the gratitude to all of you that you have joined the proceedings. This is very important in terms of that we are saying that National Disaster Management Authority is working on this, and Mr. Kamal Kishore, who is the chair of the committee, who has been there, who is there, who has also joined here in this webinar. I welcome all of you. I welcome Shri Krishna Vasaji. I welcome Vyasji and the dignitaries. I welcome also Shri Shivastavji. From the states, I see many of the faces, but all the delegates, what I am saying this, we are really grateful to you. In this particular webinar, the importance is that those who have been there in the draft committee of 2003 and 2004, when this act was the bill was getting drafted, those are also joining, have joined this. Mr. Anil Sinha is there. I welcome you, sir. So high-powered committee members, that the first initiated the importance of the bill. So he is also there. The second is important that those who carried forward and executed in the states at the national level, they are also there, the part of this deliberations today. Then we have academia, those who have worked with very closely with these institutions, NDMA, SDMA, and the state governments time and again for when the act was conceived and moving ahead, and also in the execution of the act. Plus, we are also having person from legislations, judiciary, and also that Ministry of Law and Justice. So most of the critical stakeholder, we have the people from private sector, civil society group, international NGOs, and few of the academia, those who have done PhD on the this Disaster Management Act, they are there. So this is a really welcome step for us, and very heartening to note that they are all here. But before I deliberate on the other issues and we can start proceedings, we request Major General Manoj Kumar Bindal to kindly finally welcome and give the introductory. Major General Manoj Kumar Bindal.
Thank you, Dr. Santosh Kumar. This particular webinar is very important because ever since the Disaster Management Act was enacted in 2005, there has been no amendment to the Disaster Management Act except for an addition which was done for regarding the meeting when it should take place. So there is a need that we must relook at the whole act, and with the nearly 15 years of experience, multivariate, multi-hazard scenarios that we are facing, is there a need to revise some of its sections? Is there a need to add anything? Or is there a need to remove anything? Is there a need to expand the scope of the Disaster Management Acts also? This pandemic has exposed the vulnerability of the population because it has brought the disaster right inside our very homes. Earlier, we were complacent that it only hits a particular geographical area or it is restricted region-wise. But this particular pandemic has shown that there is no Lakshman Rekha for that. It is right inside our home. Like we have seen air pollution. When last year the air pollution hit Delhi and its surroundings, the AQI went more than 700. And in the max ICU ward, it was 310 at some point of time. So the disasters have taken on a new meaning now. With this change in the meaning of the disaster and their ferocity and their impact, is there a need to change something or make the Disaster Management Act more inclusive of all these factors? lot of things have been thrown about with this pandemic, which has been an eye-opener because no one could imagine that what happened in 1918, 1920, which was again uh, because of lack of connectivity and other things, did not spread that far as this particular COVID-19 had spread. That functioning of the SDMAs and the SDRFs, their financing, the role of SDMA vis-a-vis the state cabinets, the definition of natural disaster itself, the management of the natural disasters and the man-made disasters, the public health emergencies, that's a major issue now. Centralization of authority it has resulted in. Then the lockdown measures, which in some cases are being argued through the various RTIs that are being received about it is encroachment on the state lists. So what do we do about it? Then fire disasters, they're increasing in number. The lightning, today the number of deaths by lightning is more than any other natural event that we are facing. Does it need to find a special mention in the Disaster Management Act? Role of the central police forces, the fire services, the civil defense, the home guards, the way they have been employed and deployed and their strengths have been used in this pandemic. Is there a case in point to give them a bigger role of disaster management also as one of their primary mandates? Then the present Disaster Management Act stops at DDMAs, district level, whereas the community, which is at the village level, at the panchayat level, is there a need to have a institutional framework right down to village level? Is it required to be included? So there are so many questions which are cropping up over a period of time, which a lot of researchers, a lot of deliberations have been writing about. So this particular webinar, this one and on 6th that we'll have with a different questionnaire, is going to analyze these issues and see what needs to be done and why it needs to be done. Today, the list of invitees has been chosen very carefully because it includes all experts in the field who have dealt with these issues, who are authority in their own fields. And it's a multi-sectoral engagement where even civil society organizations have been involved, because we have seen in this pandemic that the role of NGOs and civil society organizations is as big as government organizations. They are working hand in hand in the field with the government, with the state government, with the district authorities. So they also maybe they also need a special mention, and some provisions are made to give them more a seat at the table, I'll say. So there are so many unanswered questions. There are so many issues which have come up. I'm not going to go into all of them because that Professor Santosh will be moderating throughout the webinar with his questions and answers, and as and when it crops up. I welcome all the participants, and we are lucky that we have two members of the NDMA also with us, Shri Kamal Kishore ji and Shri Vatsa ji. And we have a large number of, if I have to name all of them, because everyone is a renowned person. So I'll welcome every one of you, and I'll hand over back to Dr. Santosh Kumar to start the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Major General Manoj Kumar Bindal, Executive Director of the National Institute of Disaster Management. In fact, you have said very rightly that how in the present context, as this Act has never been amended despite smaller changes made in the past, but the COVID-19 has given different kind of challenges, different interpretation, and is largely enforced kind of a act which has been ever applied in the scenario of disaster management. And we are fortunate enough today that we have that person, delegates and officials, those who contributed in high-powered committee, 3 members, Professor V.K. Sharma, Professor Sani, and also Mr. Anil Sinhaji. And also then when we traveled further, and then we had a national task force was constituted and which submitted the report in 2013. Dr. P.K. Mishra was the chairman of the committee, which report was submitted 2003. R.K. Srivastava was the member secretary as a joint secretary, Ministry of Disaster Management, Ministry of Home Affairs, DM division. He's also here. And the third is now that the third phase, which we are saying that NDMA and the state level officials, they are all executing it after the formation of NDMA and the SDMA in 2005. And they are also, that's Shri Kamal Kishorji, the member NDMA is here. Shri Krishna Vatsaji, he is here, the member NDMA. And many committee members, the committee which has been constituted by the ministry for the drafting or the act or any amendment needed, they all are here. So this is very opportune time to relate with the challenges with the COVID-19 which we had faced. And I also personally myself consider very fortunate that I have been the part of this journey of since 2003, drafting to the standing committee until this National Task Force consultation process. And I see Sri Jindal, Sanjeev Kumar Jindal, Joint Secretary, is also here. And so I welcome also Ministry of Home Affairs and the Legal Affairs, all are here. 2-3 points which I would like to mention, that format which we have had. We as Major General Bindal mentioned, that this time we have very carefully chosen participants, because those who have been through and participating and also executing this at all levels. So differently, they have their different perspective on this and different experiences. So in this context, we wanted to have this, and the deliberation and recommendations of all the delegates who are here will be submitted to MHA and subsequently to the NDMA committee, which are there. The members are here. So in this context, that we see that COVID-19 is here, and also that amendment which we are saying, that the amendment doesn't happen very frequently, and it should not happen also. So we say that it's 2020, and this whatever we will be recommending, and the committee will take up whatever the committee would choose, and that what is to be taken and what is to be left. That will continue at least 15 to 20 years from now. So 2030 or 2040, this act will be commencing, will be in action. So in this context, how futuristic our views are and how things we are there. And this is very important, as he said, that Dr. Vatsa is here also. I was thinking that if Dr. Vatsa can flag some of the issues in the beginning itself, so that the discussion can move on the similar direction, and we will take up one and after the another issues. And if Mr. Kamal Kishore is also here, so we want to flag some of the issues in the beginning itself, that what is the objective when we think of and how that entire discussion should go. So I take this opportunity to welcome all of you, and I request Dr. Krishna Vatsa to share some of his concerns, that how discussion should follow and points should be considered. Dr. Vatsa.
Thank you, Santoshji, for giving me this opportunity. I will straight away come to the issues that are relevant for discussion today. Ever since the Act was legislated in 2005, I think there was a felt need to address some of the deficiencies and shortcomings in the Act. The major problem arose largely because there was already an existing disaster management structure at the national and state and district levels. But the Act did not pay sufficient heed to those existing structures, and it created a new structure. So as a result, there were two parallel structures going on all the time. And there was no effort at harmonizing these two structures. And just to give an example, that we have a department at the state level, and we have a state disaster management authority. And how the state disaster management authority and the department should come together and function more smoothly has not really been enunciated in the Act. So this dual structure that came in place as a result of this Act, I think is an important issue that needs discussion and some change. I think there have been a number of efforts at amending the law. The task force was constituted, and I'm glad Mr. R.K. Srivastava is here, so he would discuss the deliberations of the task force. I was also associated with that task force, so number of recommendations were made, but again, we could not bring it to a logical conclusion. But the pandemic has now given a sense of urgency. Now, this has affected all the segments of the government, all the segments of the populations, all the segments of the productive and economic sectors. So it's important that we have a Disaster Management Act which is more comprehensive and which addresses different ways of bringing these constituents together. We have seen a lot of visibility that has been given recently to the Disaster Management Act in the context of lockdown, restrictions, containments, and things like that. But it's also important that the pandemic also brings together the communities and the private sector, NGOs, all of them together. This is a huge crisis that is staring at the country. So an important goal before us is to secure the support and participation of all the constituents in making this act more effective. We must also underline the fact that Disaster Management Act is gives depth to the fundamental right, that is right to life. So it's very important that Disaster Management Act becomes more functional and more substantive in its impact. And at the structural level, there are certain issues which I would like to raise. One, of course, at the national level, National Disaster Management Authority, there was a general perception that it had become top heavy. We had 8-9 members when it was constituted first time in 2005. And I think that situation continued till 2014. And if you see after 2014, the number of members has been reduced. So that's a deliberate effort to reduce the numbers and make the NDMA much slimmer. So if that is the direction, then it should be reflected in the Act. The second thing is the issue that I already alluded to earlier. The State Disaster Management Authority and the District Disaster Relief Commissioner's Office. How these two different authorities should be harmonized, how they should come together, how they should function together. Even in many states where the SDMAs are functional, there are certain issues that exist between the authority and the department. At the district level, I think we have a district disaster management committee, but it is just a committee and there is no substantive structure underneath. And today, when the district magistrate or the collector is leading the campaign against the COVID-19, I think this substantive support is very much needed, and I think the Act should do something to empower this structure, this institutional structure of disaster management at the district level. One more development, and then I will conclude. The Finance Commission also has come up with a number of recommendations, which has expanded the concept and functioning of the disaster management at the national level. It has set up now four funding windows. One is the response fund, another is the funding window for recovery and reconstruction, and one for preparedness and capacity building. These are three funding windows within the national and state disaster response fund. And in addition to this response fund, there is a national and a state disaster mitigation fund. Now, some of these things need to be, they have been indicated in the Act, but there is a need for, again, harmonization between the recommendations of the Finance Commission and the provisions of the Act. if it is harmonized, I think it would really expand the concept and functioning of the disaster management. So structurally, conceptually, structurally, and in terms of the financial resources that need to be made available, these are some of the most important issues that need to be discussed, and some of the provisions need to be improved, to make disaster management act more substantive. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Vatsa, for just giving a broader outline that what is the challenge and what is the need of the hour. And you mentioned about this, the pandemic has given a different shape altogether, and different situation. And you are talking about this engagement of more players formally, like the private sector, community consideration, and also that all society persons kind of integration. This is a very, very important thoughts which you have shared in the light of structure and then content. Then we are talking about financial inclusion, and then those Finance Commission recommendations which have come up, how that seamlessly gets integrated into the DGM Act. And you have given a very good outline that how then the state also, department and the SDMAs are working to. So larger context you have set in for the discussion of today in terms of amendment. You did refer also that the task force which was submitted its report in 2013. So it's a very, very interesting that the center stage of this discussion, it is important to listen from the state who are into the helm of affairs. And Dr. Vatsa has also raised a very pertinent issue of the state authorities and their district disaster authorities and their strengthening of this authority. Then top heavy also you mentioned about this and the state constitution, and how this coordination is going on between the disaster management department and the state disaster authority, and how that act can facilitate those processes. So at this stage, if Sri Vyasji is there, Vice Chairman of the Bihar State Disaster Authority, can I have you, sir, on the your point, please?
Yeah, good morning to all, and thank you, Professor Santosh Kumar, for giving me the opportunity to share my views. I went through the recommendations of the task force, which was constituted and submitted its report in 2013. At that time, I was working in the Department of Disaster Management in Bihar, and I also was part of the deliberations which took place in Delhi. And I'm happy to note that at the national state level, this committee has submitted its report, which I think is a wonderful report, very excellent report. And it takes care of a number of issues which were flagged at that very time. But it appears to me that in view of this pandemic, many issues have cropped up. And if I use the idiom, that a lot of water has flown down the river, down the Ganges, it would be an apt illustration. Based on this experience of this pandemic, I would like to point out certain issues for the considerations of which has been constituted at the level of Mr. Kamal Kishore. He was aware prior to this pandemic that Disaster Management Act would cover even health hazards or health emergencies. We in the Disaster Management Department, we the practitioners, always considered that during natural disasters, some health issues would also come up, and those health issues would be dealt as you are dealing with a particular disaster. And we also considered that if there is a mass casualty, then the hospital disaster management plans would include how to deal with those mass casualties at the time of any disaster. But for the first time in the definition of disaster, or you can say after this pandemic of COVID-19 has been notified by the government of India as a disaster. Now I'll read the definition of disaster. What does it say? Disaster means a catastrophe, mishap, calamity, or grave occurrence in any area arising from natural or man-made causes, or by accident or negligence, which results in substantial loss of life and destruction of property, or damage to or degradation of environment, and is of such a nature or magnitude as to be beyond the coping capacity of the community of the affected area. Now, the mere reading of this definition of the disaster does not give the inkling that any epidemic, so to say, is a different ballgame altogether. When influenza was pandemic, then we had the Epidemic Control Act, Epidemic Disease Act. Every state has that. When plague was there, we had the act. But this very definition nowhere gives an impression that epidemics can also be, or for that matter, health emergencies can also be as a disasters or notified as a disasters. Someone has just pointed out, I think Mr. Bindal, Major General Bindal has pointed out, that lightning is causing a lot of deaths. But so far, Government of India has not notified lightning as a disaster. You know, states like Bihar and Orissa and other states, including Jharkhand and Uttar Pradesh, I know that we had made representation to the Government of India during our time that please include lightning as a disaster, but it was not notified. Later on in 2015, when certain amount out of that SDRA was allowed to be spent on local specific disasters, then we in fact included lightning as a local specific disasters. Whereas in Bihar since 2009, we were paying out of our state funds, out of our own the compensation or ex gratia to the victims of the lightning, etc., etc. But when Government of India has notified this pandemic as a disaster, my submission would be that the committee which has been considered should think in including, health emergencies as the disasters, in the definition of disasters, so that there is any ambiguity. Because I have worked with the NDMA since, and I know that in no time, there was no time at all where even NDMA ever considered any health emergency as the disaster. In my state, the cases of AES, acute encephalitis syndrome, and Japanese encephalitis in my state as well as in Gorakhpur, in Uttar Pradesh. I mean, many children are killed by, these two major health emergencies. But nowhere we ever thought that, okay, these would be covered under the disasters, and if some say gratia has to be paid or some capacity building has to be made, it was to be made out of the state funds, out of the state budget. So if the health emergency part is included, I think it would help a lot in containing this kind of health disasters, which I think now that in the coming years, these health disasters would certainly pose grave danger to the humankind. Secondly, the climate-induced disasters. I mean, at one point at one line is there in the definition which says that degradation of environment. But degradation of environment is caused by so many other causes. But so far as climate-induced disaster is concerned, the whole world is now seized of this climate-induced disasters. So, in my opinion, I would like to flag that in addition to the health emergencies, the climate-induced disaster should also find mention in the definition of disaster. Now, I'll come to section 6, which empowers, the National Disaster Management Authority to do a couple of things. Section 6 says that national authority shall have the responsibility for laying down the policies, plans, and guidelines for disaster management for ensuring timely and effective response to disaster. I mean, it should be very clear that response is the responsibility of the governments. Whereas you are laying down policies, plans, and guidelines, for effective response to disasters. Your job should be to lay down policies, plans, and guidelines for prevention, mitigation, and preparedness response should be totally left with the government because it involves major departments of the government at a central and state level. Now, the issue is if you are laying down policies, plans, and guidelines, then how come under Section 10, the NAC has power to issue instructions and directions to the whole of the country, which has happened in the case of the lockdown? If purpose is that whole of the country should be administered not as a federal structure but as a unitary structure, then this disaster management act somewhere should mention that it would have overriding effect on all the laws of the land. It should say somewhere notwithstanding anything contained anywhere in any act and all, because the central government, though we are working with the authority, but the fact remains that whatever was stated by the central government, the states had to agree to that. Mention that this is the minimum which you have to do. Beyond that, you can do much more. So nowhere it says that you have to issue directions which is applicable in the whole of the country. This act is to facilitate disaster management. This act is not to kind of pose certain constitutional issues like whether India is a unitary state or it is a federal state. India is a federal state. Teachers, the people who know about the constitution, and I think a lot of legal fraternity people are there in this webinar, they should deliberate upon that. During pandemic, nobody went to the court to challenge whatever was decided at the national level, because everybody is afraid of, everybody is fearful of the life, So nobody questioned anything which has been done. But we know and we have seen and we have experienced that, this lockdown has created, a lot of problems to the people also. It not only facilitated, not only contained the spread of the virus, it also kind of put a lot of problems before the people. We have seen police, kind of beating the migrant workers in Delhi. What to talk about other places? Stopping and checking, the flow of the migrant levels at the state borders. We have seen between Gurgaon and Delhi that lot of motorists were put at the problem. States not allowing to go to Haryana or come to Delhi and so on and so forth. So these things should be very clear whether this act has got overriding effect on other laws, because in order to deal with disasters like pandemic or like epidemic, you've got a disease by the Epidemic Disease Control Act or something. And under that Epidemic Disease Act, a lot of powers are with the appropriate governments which they can use. Our CRPC 144 is there. Under CRPC 144, one has the power to ask people to desist from doing certain things or to do certain things. Now, the last is the chapter 10, which deals with the offenses. Now, the section 60 of chapter 10, I'm reading that out, it says that after listing out several offenses, it says that cognizance of offense. No court shall take cognizance of an offense under this act except on a complaint. This word is very important. Complaint made by blah 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 blah. Complaint has been filed by the national authority, a state authority, the central government, a state government, a district authority, or any other authority empowered by these agencies, or any person who is required to give a notice of 1 month and so on and so forth. But it is a complaint. It is not an FIR. An FIR is filed when a cognizable offense is disclosed. If a cognizable offense is likely to happen or has happened, and police gets power to arrest and do whatever is required under the CRPC. Complaint means one has to file a complaint before the magistrate, and magistrate inquires into that very complaint. The magistrate can order the police to lodge an FIR if required and submit a report, and based on that takes the cognizance. Now, during this lockdown, what has happened? Police has filed, and I think the legal to deliberate on that, they filed a lot of cases against, a lot of people under the Disaster Management Act, and arrests have been made. People have been sent to the jails. When it's an uncognizable offense, how can FIRs can be instituted? And everybody swears by the name of the Disaster Management Act. We have undertaken a lot of capacity building programs by our BSDMA, and the deputy collectors and the DYSPs who are being trained, they pose this very question. And we quote this section 60 that complaint has to be filed before the magistrate. So this thing should be made very, very clear, because nobody has approached the courts to kind of test the veracity of those FIRs. But when the things would become normal, people would go. But why the people should be made to rush to the court because they have to spend money when the law is very, very clear that you cannot make arrests? We know that even under section 188 of IPC, which is non-cognizable, people are being arrested. So learned during this very pandemic also form part of the review of our amendment of this very act. If you feel that yes, arrest is necessary if someone is violating Disaster Management Act, then please make it a cognizable offense. Then delete the section 60. But if it is section 60, if it says that it's a complaint, then please consider that the concerned authorities, the concerned administrations should be apprised of this very fact, so that unnecessarily people are not put into a lot of problems. So these are certain issues I wanted to flag. Yesterday I spoke with Sun. He sent us a report of that task force recommendations, and recommendations are very, very valid. They take care of the function departments have to perform, the functions the central government ministries have to perform, NDMA the functions NDMA has to perform, SDMAs have to perform. It's a very well written recommendation, and I fully support that, subject to certain observations which I made in the context of my experiences during this very pandemic. Thank you very much.
Sir, for bringing beautifully the points and your experiences, both as a Principal Secretary Disaster Management in Government of Bihar and also Vice Chairman at the Bihar State Disaster Management Authority, especially addressing issues related to the definition itself, which is the basic and the fundamental of the entire Disaster Management Act 2005. And you also raised as whether it's a cognizable offense or it's a non-cognizable offense, and this section 60 has to be taken into account. This is very important, and let us hear what Sri Vyasji and Dr. Vatsa and all the Mr. Kamal Kishore was about to say, but couldn't make it his point because of the power failure. But in this context, the state perspective one, which Sri Vyasji has mentioned, any other delegates who wish at this stage, who is representing or who is from the state perspective, who can bring on some perspective other than what Mr. Vyasji has said, because unnecessary repetition would be avoided and new points would be taken care of. So state authorities or the State Department, if they wish to mention something here, and then we will move further at this point of time. Anybody would like to volunteer for this? Otherwise, I will request with the
Sir Santosh.
Right.
Professor Santosh.
Sir.
Can you hear me, sir? Dr.
Santosh? Yeah.
No, I don't represent the state. I don't represent any government body. So since already few points have been made, so I thought that a few observations I should make beforehand. You proceed further in this thing. And I think most of the points have been covered by Dr. Vasa, by Vyasji, by you people. This task force has been constituted, and the necessity which was felt by NDMA or by the government or by the NIDM to constitute a task force and make a fresh recommendation for some amendment in the Act because it has not been amended since 2005. What I find different in today's situation, and when we undertook this process of amendment in 2000, I think 2011, we started this process, and Dr. P.K. Misra, he was the chairman, and we had a wide consultation. And most of the point which has been highlighted by Dr. Bassa, that there was some issue of harmonization between the existing structure and the structure which was envisaged under the Act. And since people, they were attuned with the existing structure, so most of the time they were approaching during the disaster time to the existing authority, not the newly created authority. And then a certain recommendations were made, and the recommendations were made for making and harmonizing those issues. But unfortunately, whatever I can gather from the people of NDMA and NIDM and the state, that nothing has been done to implement those recommendations. So before we take any other such exercise of amendment, let us keep in this mind that if you make another exercise without going into the implementation part of the earlier exercise, the perception about such exercise will be that it is also going to be a futile kind of the exercise. You will be coming out with the recommendation without any implementation. So that should be kept in mind, that while you do this exercise, there should be exercise for implementation of whatever the recommendation was done. And this recommendation was done by a very eminent authority. He is now at a very important position, and it was a very well thought and very good recommendations. If you see the present scenario which has necessitated this task force, constitution of the task force, that this pandemic has started this process. If you see this pandemic, where we have been finding lacking, we have been lacking in our response. So if you go for any kind of the amendment, you can't make much changes as far as the response is concerned in the Act. If you see the disaster management cycle, what is the disaster management cycle? You start with the assessment, and then you end with the response, and you go for the post-event. These are the three main stages. This time assessment, it was not in our hand. You could assess the earthquake. About the earthquake, you can't make an assessment, but about the flood, about the fire, many other disasters are there. You can make a pre-assessment that such an event is going to happen, and therefore to take a precautionary measure. You also respond to this. So this pandemic has not thrown anything new challenge for us. The challenges were already there since beginning, and those points have already been highlighted in those recommendations. This response thing, which has thrown a real challenge in handling this pandemic, I don't think much thing can be done by way of making any amendment in the Act. Few points which have been highlighted by the Dr. Vyas about this lightening thing, that it has not been covered by the Finance Commission and things. If you see that implementation part, there is a conflict, the role which has been asserted by the Finance Commission and what has been envisaged under the Act. Act has already defined what is the disaster. Now, no other authority has any locus standi to redefine what is the disaster. When this Finance Commission makes the recommendation and identifies that these are the only disaster eligible for the response fund, they are going against the spirit of the Disaster Management Act, because the Disaster Management Act defines the disaster, which are the disaster. It defines that what is the response fund, and therefore all the response disaster, they become automatically eligible for the response fund. Now the Finance Commission cannot usurp the authority parallelly and say that no, this fund is only available for flood and only for the earthquake and not for the lightning, or not for the pandemic and not for the biological disaster and not for this. This is something, so that has to be somehow the finance ministry and the Ministry of Home Affairs, they must understand they cannot play the spirit of the act. So this is one thing which answers the dilemma which the state faces, and particularly those who are dealing with the event of the disaster, different kind of the disaster, and that the Finance Commission binds their hand in reaching them relief. The third point, which just by the way I want to highlight it, that when we envisaged for the amendment of the Act, we found that the role of authority which was envisaged in the Act, and when this institution evolved over a period of time, then the conflict started happening between the over the execution part, that whether the authority has a role to execute and handle the event or not. So this is how this entire conflict started, because if you see the role of authority, whether at the state level or at the district level, or their role is only confined only to make a policy and out of the advisory. Policy and whatever the advisory things which they conceptualize, that is also again on the advice of the National Executive Committee or the State Executive Committee or the District Executive Committee. So therefore, the role of the authority was very, very limited, and this is how the conflict was going between the MHA, between the NSC, between the state, and between different kind of the authority, and therefore we came out with this idea of going for the changes. So my advice will be, before we proceed further in proceeding of the task force, let us have a look into what are the recommendations and what new things needs to be added. And before we carry out this exercise, let us focus also on whatever the recommendation is done, how we can implement it. Then there will be a general feeling that this is also going to be another futile exercise. We will come out with some booklet and it will never see the light of the day. And last thing, which executive director had mentioned in his about the fire thing, I think this is the forum I should highlight it. When in 2011 and 13 we made an exercise to enact a fire act. The draft was prepared in consultation with the state. The director of the fire services of the Maharashtra, he was the person who was given this role of drafting. The draft was ready. It was sent to the law ministry for their vetting and for further action, but somehow it never saw the light of the day. So the exercise, we should also be very focused that whatever we are doing, let us implement it also, so that people don't lose faith in this kind of the task force, in this kind of the exercise. This is all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Srivastava, for bringing this, the importance of the execution of the recommendation made by the National Task Force, which was constituted for the amendment in the Act. And it is very, very important to take it further for the execution, otherwise we consider to be a futile exercise. That is coming to the implementation. And you also suggested that even if that in the context of pandemic, if we need to actually add on, is to be looked into that what is the role of national authorities and the state authorities, district authorities, and how it should be taken up in terms of the policy advice to the execution, and what is the gray areas of the execution and this policy advisory. And NEC and response you have been made as a very, very important thing. The disaster management response is, and adding, and you did mention about this fire act and all. We have one delegate, our Sri P.N. Rai Sahab from Bihar. He has been the Director General of Police in the Civil Defense and Fire Services, and been attending these meetings. And also he is currently the member of the Bihar State Disaster Center. Can I have your reflection, sir, in terms of that, what Mr. Srivastava has mentioned and Vyasji and other, that how response and the department and legislation can help in this direction while we are going for the changes, which is not mentioned in the National Act, although this task force report did mention, recommended about the inclusion of police and other, but I request you to please intervene and say something about this at this stage. Shri P.N. Rai. Probably he's not here.
Can you hear me?
Acha, haan, yeah, please go ahead.
Okay. So good morning to everybody. I'll restrict myself to the response part. This morning, a friend of mine called from Delhi. He said that I can see a policeman standing in front of house next to mine. He's carrying an oximeter. Now, apparently, somebody living in that flat, an air hostess probably, she has been affected by the COVID. Now, this is a new role that we are seeing, a response role, a first responder role from the police side. The social policing. All through the COVID management, we have been seeing policemen working with the health workers as the frontline workers, and they have been doing the first responder role all through. And all of us know that thousands of policemen have also been affected by the COVID in the last 3 months or so, and several have died also. So I am taking off from this. What I mean to say is that the police, when I say police, I also mean the home guards, the fire services, and the civil defense, all four together. The police and fire services and the home guards may be controlled by different people, different departments, but I would like to club them together as first responders. We understand that the community is always the first responder, agreed. Community, the police, the fire services, and the home guards. Now, we also know that in this pandemic, the panchayats, the local bodies, they played a very big role. They provided the maintenance for the quarantine centers. And later on in Bihar, I know that they are also supplying, they are giving masks and soaps to all the villages. So I'm speaking on behalf of the police. When I say police, I mean the police, the home guard, fire services, and the other first responder, the community. Now the police is the first responder after the community. They reach a site of incident, they are closest to the incident site. They provide the first response, the first action. Now, whatever quality you may call it, be it a boat tragedy, they may not have any sort of rescue equipment with them, be it a road accident, be it a fire accident, but they reach there first. Now, since they are not equipped, they're not trained, they're not mandated for that, the police and other services believe that their primary job is maintenance of law and order and crime control. Disaster management is not considered to be shall I say, an important function. Although in all government activities, the SP of police and other functionaries of the police department are deeply involved. But somehow there is a feeling that this is not their job within brackets, I'm saying, within commas, I'm saying. Now we have to make some activities so that this mandate is given to these agencies. All I'm saying, police, fire, and home guards all together. Like in Bihar, we have a strength of 80,000 policemen and 54,000 home guards, about 12,000 firemen. It's a big role. On the other hand, we are strengthening the NDRF and SDRF. It's good. Let's strengthen them. Let's raise the strength. But they have the limitations also. We all understand that. They are located far away from the incident site. They are working in an unfriendly environment, unknown environment, and therefore there has to be an effort. So let's consider giving mandate to the response agencies, the first responder agencies, the police and home guard and all that, in this, and this can be followed up with right provisions for their training, their equipment, and all that. That's one. The second part is the community. Now we want everything to happen at the village level, the community level. We also know that community first response. Now in this pandemic, the community, the panchayats have been very active, and therefore we need to think about the community as well. Our institutional framework, except West Bengal probably, is only up to the district level. That DDMs, the DDMs too, of course, they're required to be strengthened, they have to be given decision-making capacity. That's another issue. There's somebody, some speaker talked about that. The district magistrate's office, the DDMA, they are rather weak in that sense that capacity is not there, decision making is not there, financial capacity is not there. And therefore, since the sort of buck ends there at the district subdivision and the circle office and the panchayats, there has to be provisions to strengthening these institutions at district, subdivision, block, and the panchayat level, so that the community and others are also equally strengthened. The third aspect that I want to touch upon is, I agree with Mr. Vyasji that there is an issue of whether the act can be implemented. There is a certain gray area in that. We understand that the issues are not cognizable. There's a gray area, I'm saying. There has to be clarity in the act that the people can act as per, because, in this pandemic also, the police has been using the IPC along with the National Disaster Act. And therefore, they may be safe in a way that they have used IPC. So the Act must clarify about this issue of the enforceability. And the last point I would like to add is the livestock has been left out in the Disaster Act. It's a very important issue. The livestock is kind of livelihood for many people in the rural areas, be it fire, be it floods, be it lightning, everything. And therefore, livestock must be part of the. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rai, because you have mentioned about a couple of things and we are noting it in terms of bringing livestock and also other things. We have Assam and Kerala also. We have listened to Bihar. Quickly, can we have a comment from Assam and then we will go to Kerala? Assam? Are you there? Yeah, please. You have listened to the deliberation. Yeah. So if any specific point you have to contribute here, please.
Basically, the provisions of the Act had been very helpful in the state, and all the response measures have been carried out only under the ambit of the provisions of the Act. And Chief Secretary and DGP, they are regularly coordinating, and they have resorted to the Act only. And as such, implementation of the Act in the pandemic situation has not been any. There has been no challenge as such. Besides that, because the Act gives a very broader framework under which all community mobilization, volunteer mobilization, private institution mobilization have been possible, and everybody has cooperated. So that way, this is all right. And one issue here is regarding the our workers in the district and beyond the districts under the ambit of disaster management institutions. As such, under the Act, we do not have institution beyond the ULBs or the PRI institutions. But we have somehow evolved a system in which the state government has appointed dedicated officers at the tehsil level, revenue circle level, through the disaster management funding provisions only from the state GIA, grants in aid. And what it looks like that there is a wider scope for strengthening the local level institutions, that is at the tehsil level or at the block level, because our results have been fruitful only because of the frontline workers at the tehsil level, that is the disaster management field professionals in the circle, revenue circle, who along with the police administration, revenue administration, and the NGOs could mobilize the resources, could strengthen the public vigilance, and also carried out the coordinated efforts. So that way, there is a great need for strengthening local institutions beyond the ULB level. Probably the Act can look issues related to that. One particular thing when we are reeling under a flood, when almost 90% of the land area and the districts are under flood, there is no provision in the Act through which the Chief Secretary or the responsible officer as per IRS can declare a disaster per se, be it man-made disaster, be it any natural disaster. we do not see a provision or an architecture through which, resorting to any particular section of the Act, one can declare a disaster. Maybe declaration mechanism of disaster could be one of the issues that the committee may like to throw light. And the department, be it the central government department or be it the state government departments, recovery and reconstruction. Basically, given the prevalent pandemic situation, the amount of losses to the business industries and small scale entrepreneurs and daily wage laborers, they have faced so much of hardship. But in our national plan or in our state plan, we need more, a stricter framework or some guidelines in which the respective departments of the central government or the state government, be it industrial, be it, any other agencies, can, challenges. Recovery part needs to be thought of well. And that's what our submission is. Otherwise, implementation of the Act, there has been no challenge.
Thank you very much for making a very specific recommendation in terms of that declaration of disaster is going to be. And the second very important is how the Act can facilitate going beyond the this PRI and other local level. So that is very, very important. The specific recommendations came from Assam to committee to be considered. I think Kerala is one state which has the system differently, and the PRI is very strong at the local level, and local governance normally execute more than 60% of the state budget. So it is important to let us hear from Kerala that what is your specific recommendation in terms of whether it's a definition or the points which all the experts have been highlighting in terms of and your experience of handling COVID, and also that these two recent flood of 18 and 19. You want to say something from Assam?
Yeah. Regarding the funding windows that is coming up in terms of the 15th FC, that is the response and disaster mitigation fund, where we have already conducted some preliminary meetings with all the concerned department at the highest level of the Chief Secretary and the Commissioner Revenue. What we are envisaging is getting the need-based proposals through the gram servers, through the PRI system, aligning the activities at the local level, which the mitigation fund guidelines basically emphasizes, so that way, we can cover more areas, need-based local solution, type of mitigation projects, and we are making it mandatory in terms of a guideline, and that's what would be submitted also to the NDMA and the MHA. So that's.
Thank you very much. You can always send us also that a specific thing which comes to mind you later also.
Sure.
But thank you very much for the contribution. Now, a lot of things have been debated on basic definition. All the people, the state government, the national government, even Dr. Vatsa, all mentioned about this, that how this pandemic and epidemic could be also taken into this. Then task force committee member also mentioned about this. Can I hear Mr. Anil Sinha ji, because he has been in the high-powered committee, and the entire deliberation of defining disaster started from there, and how it gone through the evolution process, and what is his thought specific on this this particular issues, and you can flag on other specific issues which we can carry forward from here to the committee. Shri Anil Sinha ji.
Okay, thank you, Santosh ji. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you. Welcome, sir.
Okay. Thanks to you, General Bindal, NIDM, NDMA. I'm in a way happy that this exercise is being undertaken once again. You see, without repetition, if I may just get down to the issues, I think first of all we should look at the context. In the context for the law.
You can continue, sir.
Please go ahead. Please go ahead, sir.
Okay. The context, as we all know, is provided by the high-powered committee. And why I am mentioning high-powered committee is not because there was a committee and all that, but the high-powered committee had given the recommendations for the recommendation for, had given actually the draft of the National Act and also the State Act, you see. Of course, it was then called National Calamity Management Act or something like that, and same for the state. I think this is an occasion. I was involved in the task force headed by Dr. P.K. Mishra, practically in every discussion, every meeting. I'm not sure, you see, I have seen the report much earlier. Now I saw only the gist of it, whether they had a look at the law, the draft proposed in the High Powered Committee. If they had a look, it was good. If they didn't have a look for whatever reasons, I think this is an occasion just to take a look at that, because I'm saying not because Anil Sinha was involved. I mean, that is hardly the reason. The major reason is that, as most of you know, a lot of you know, High Powered Committee was really Chintan and Manthan, over 2 years, extensive Chintan and Manthan over 2 years all over the country, in which chief secretaries of various states and all kinds of organization officials were involved. In fact, the committee to draft the law was headed by the then Chief Secretary of Madhya Pradesh, Mr. Maharata. And that is why I'm flagging this, that it will be good to take a quick look at the draft of the two acts, the National Act and the State Act. Secondly, it is good that we are, because that again was a great consultation, nationwide consultation. I only wish that the task force itself had membership from these states, the representation from these states. The states were consulted, I mean, there is no doubt, and extensively consulted. But being a member of the task force and sitting when the deliberations of the internal deliberations of the task force are being held, and then taking final view as to what needs to be done, where amendments will be done, etc., finalizing the recommendations. I think for a couple of state representatives to be there would have been good. I'm not aware exactly of the constitution of the present committee under Mr. Kamal Kishore. I'm sure eminent people are involved, but I have not yet heard whether state representatives are involved. We have already, listened to the discussions, and where we find that, look, after all, disasters happen somewhere locally, they happen somewhere in the district. It may have pandemic has a global dimension, you see. And the response is also predominantly local, you see. So that is the importance of the district level institutions, starting with District Disaster Management Authority down, what's to panchayat and community and villages, etc., etc. And you see, we know, after all, the majority of while the Home Secretary may sign an order and issue, which is perfectly fine, but the implementation, and that is the cutting edge of the law, unless until it is implemented effectively, your law is enforced. To the extent it is not implemented, it gets enforced, it gets diluted, you see. And therefore, that is the importance of having the state representatives. That having said, you see, now if we take a look at the Disaster Management Act 2005, I think first of all, we should take a look at the preamble. It doesn't really use the word preamble. It says introduction is statement of objects and reasons, you see. And there it talks of prevention and mitigation. And with a view to do that, which is advocated is holistic, coordinated, and prompt response. And I think these key words, hold a lot of answers as to how the whole act should unfold in terms of sections, subsections, clauses, etc., etc. So we can, look at it from each word. Is the act holistic? And then you find that, no, not really. It is to a great extent, but it doesn't talk of Panchayati Raj institutions. It doesn't talk directly of urban local bodies. It doesn't talk of women. It doesn't talk of children. Then you see someone said, mentioned about the climate risk and things like. So there are many things which have been said, which will have to be stretched. They are by implications. But I think the task force also mentioned that there should be mention of women, children, other vulnerable sections, etc., all those things. So that is about the holistic. Then coordinated and prompt responses. I mean, they are key to any implementation of a law or any management of a disaster, and much more so in the pandemic situation. A great deal of coordination, because practically the whole governments have been involved, maybe dozens of departments. And then in terms of prompt response, we have seen how prompt response matters or doesn't matter. Wherever delays have been there in our country, and wherever, it has not been done, there the results, they are very, very clear, you see. So I think we need to look at these keywords and then relate it to how the rest of the law is really drawn. Is disaster. Normally, I think many of us do not refer to that, but whenever there is a legal case, I think Vyasji mentioned about some cases, etc., being filed, maybe filed, etc. Court will always start by looking at the definition of the disaster. And I think there is need to include, non-human species. I think it just talks of, maybe many people will argue that it talks of everyone, all. But then again, to highlight the importance of certain things, non-human species or animal resources, etc., that should be mentioned, And then, I think the pandemic has brought to the light the importance of the public health system, the health and medical relief aspect. There is no disaster practically. I think there is none disaster practically where the health and the medical relief aspects do not come. Every disaster requires, the involvement of your medical response, your public health systems, etc. And therefore, and somehow or the other, the present act, nowhere mentions the importance of the public health systems. So I think that is one lesson to be learned. Pandemic has really taught us many lessons. That is one lesson to be learned. That because it is not because of pandemic has taught this. I say there is no disaster at all in which this aspect doesn't come, and therefore that needs to be mentioned. As far as now coming to one thing, just basic, that rules. Whenever an act is made, an act will perhaps never be, I won't say can never be perfect, but then it can never encompass everything and every aspect of an issue, But then, act would provide a framework, legal mechanism, instrument, and a framework. But then whatever is left, like the definition of disaster. Now, what disasters are covered, by this definition of disaster? In fact, I have been saying that the current definition of disaster is very, very challenging. It is totally open-ended, because you talk of catastrophe and mishap and grave occurrence happening due to natural causes, man-made reasons, by accident, by negligence. So that is covering everything under the sun. So there are dilemmas, there are problems, as to what comes, It is not by common sense, because these are legal instruments. So if we cannot there can be argument, how can you list the disasters? High-powered committee, you would recall, many others would recall, categorize and identified and categorized disasters into 5 categories, I think water and climate related disasters and geological disasters, and then nuclear, biological, chemical disasters, then accident-related disasters, and epidemic-related disasters. And in 5 categories, I think there were 34 disasters. Now, with lightning and many other things, the number is increasing. So if we cannot put it in the act, then create rules. Rules must be drafted for certain things. I suppose for NIDM, NIDM. Think it is there for others. So that is something which must be done in a time-bound manner. Now, I will not speak on this, NDMA and then MHA and SDMA. But there are perceptions. The perception in the public is that when you create a national disaster management authority, like it is something like, not exactly, Federal Emergency Management Agency in USC. So what happens? The public perception is that if there is a disaster, it is this agency, FEMA there or NDMA here, in public perception, which needs to come to the forefront, take charge of the situation and lead the situation. But somehow that is not happening. I think task force has tried to address, but there is need to just take a look at that once again, and harmonize. Harmonization is what was used. And same argument would hold for the relationship or the equation or harmonization between disaster management department, DMDs, or revenue department as in many states, and the state disaster management authorities. Now, you see, I'll come to DDM a little later, but let me just flag one more thing. Right in the beginning, the preamble, the objects and reasons, that mentions about prompt response. Now, and coordinated. These two are very key words, but how do you do that? There is one instrument, well-defined instrument of ensuring both coordination and prompt response, and that is the Emergency Operations Center. And what we call is the state-of-the-art Emergency Operations Center, because technology is involved in a big way in Emergency Operations Center. And by now, after 15 years of the Act, I thought we should have had a network of, state-of-the-art EOCs. In 1995, when Kobe faced earthquake, where earthquake was there, and secondary disaster of fire was also there. Now also we are talking concurrent disaster, overlapping disasters, but that was a case of earthquake as the primary disaster and fire as the secondary disasters. And out of 6,334 and odd people who were killed, we must take note that less were killed by earthquake, and around 4,000 people out of 6,000 were killed by the fire. And then Japanese realized, oh, look, this kind of a thing has happened. And, they changed the emergency operation. Their emergency operation center then also was very good. But now what they have, and what was commissioned, I think in 2003 or something like that, when I was there and I had seen, was really state of the art. And I'm sure India can talk of and can manage. We have the technology, we have the knowledge, etc., etc. So that is why I'm flagging EOC right at this stage. You see, we still have rudimentary, control rooms in many states. I mean, I won't like to name. It doesn't look nice. But many places, what we have in the name of EOC is rudimentary control rooms, with no database, with no other technology, but 2 phones and 2 registers and 2 people sitting, etc., etc. I think that doesn't. That is not going to really help us, in the current situation and the kind of situations which are likely to arise. Yeah. Now, just one thing which I like to mention, NDRF is one concept. I can see the presence of Mr. Khem Singh, literally the father of National Disaster Response Force, and I'm sure he will, speak on that. But somewhere I read, I think it was perhaps Professor Sunita Reddy's idea, I must quote her, that she advocated the case of National Disaster Medical Response Forces. We have seen in the current pandemic that while, National Disaster Response Force plays its own roles, but then somehow medical response, as I highlighted in the beginning, that is a crucial part of not only pandemic, but every kind of disaster which we have experienced or which we can imagine. And therefore, there is need to think of that. We can't take a view, but I think this needs to be flagged, whether we can have, initially NDRF again was an idea which no one thought, we had CPOs, Central Police Organizations, and all of that. So what will NDRF do? But today NDRF has become the visible face of disaster management and response, but maybe in a way management also, not only in India, but even outside, including advanced country like Japan, That is why let us move on this idea, National Disaster Medical Response Force, whether that can be there, a lot of possibilities, but I'm not going to the details. Now, my last point is about district disaster management authorities. District disaster management authorities are the most important for two reasons. One is that they are at the ground level, They are the ones who, they are not into policy, they are not into guidelines, they are the ones who have to implement and take actions, and that is why that is very, very important. Second is, I think their responsibility is far more onerous than SDM and NDM. You see, as per present scheme, NDM and SDMA, they do not deal with the whole cycle of disaster management. Like NDMA is not involved into response. SDMA is, most of the SDMAs, some SDMAs are involved, but most of the SDMAs are not involved into responses, But DDMA is one entity which has to deal with the whole cycle of disaster management. Whether it is preparedness, whether it is response or prevention, mitigation, everything, capacity building, they are the ones. And yet, I think they have been the most neglected of the three institutions, in the last 15 years. I will just say that because I think some recommendations in the task force I found, but NDM is, the DDM is substantive structure, I think Vatsa mentioned, Krishna mentioned about it. So that's a very good, but we need to go a little bit more. PRIs and ULBs, I think we'll have to find a mention, You can't go by implication. Now we have to have plans, we have to build the capacities of PRIs. In many cities we have seen, like in Maharashtra is a case where the Bombay response on Corona, municipal corporation. The state government is not involved in the municipal area. The state government is involved in the rest of these states. I think that kind of a thing must be built in the rest of the country also. And therefore, there is case to local authorities is mentioned, but I think let us mention urban local body so that even finance commissions, etc., they have been making recommendations for urban local bodies, but for disaster response, disaster preparedness, we talk of so many things in the municipal, child problem is there, all kinds of waste problem is there. I just close, then private sector.
Okay.
Yeah, just you see, academia doesn't find a mention. I think academia and research organizations in our field, they must be there, NGOs do not find mention. Directly, there are two, section 23 and there are 26 perhaps. One says that, to ensure that NGOs act in a equitable manner. I mean, that is a little bit of a negative connotation. And the civil society. I think the role of civil society and NGOs must be. And lastly, about what P.N. Raji was saying, we create a cadre of volunteers, like we have volunteers in USA, like we have volunteers in Australia. Person like you and me can be a volunteer, that is the kind of a scheme they have. While we think of volunteers only in terms of home guards, etc., all that. So let me, end at this. Thank you, Sandeep,
thank you
for this opportunity. I think the discussion till now has been great. Thank you. Thank you once again.
Thank you very much, sir. So if we count on the time, we have 12:57 now. We have 33 minutes left today for the rest of the discussion. And then we have planned this, if many issues gets unresolved today and not discussed, we will carry over to the second one, which is we have kept for the 6th. I would request those who are available on the 6th also, they can join in the meeting, the webinar on this subject itself. And those who do not get chance to speak today, that is time where they can. I will try to catch up quickly. Just I wanted to inform the House today. This is very intrigue which is coming up, and the time and again the definition and the different rules, the new players to be brought in. And Mr. Sinha Saab also has mentioned about the National Disaster Medical Response Force, and then inclusion NDRF, SDRF, and beyond that local level, and so on and so forth. Many things. I'll just take a couple of intervention before I invite legal person, Ministry of Law, and also that person, academia, who have worked on this. It is important, and then we'll go for the public administration point of view. Mr. Sahni is here. But before I go to him, it is time to call Ministry of Law and Justice to see that how they are looking at this as a kind of a discussion going on, and the specific recommendation which is coming to as an implication of law and as a Ministry of Law's perspective. Can I request Additional Secretary who is here to kindly deliberate upon? Probably he's, so let us hear Mr. Sahni, and then we will move on to the Mr. Kerala and then Mr. Sahni, and then we'll move to finance part. We have 3 organizations are there in the finance who are dealing with. Then we have a civil society and also that former member, so Mr. K.M. Singhji and Mr. Vinod Menon is there to have their insight as a almost listening to all these, how they see this. We have NDRF also there. So quickly, I will have from Kerala, please.
Yeah, good afternoon, sir.
Be brief, please, and quick,
yeah, sure.
specific recommendation.
Yeah, sure. Just I wanted to add 5 points. This is mainly from the local authorities, the functions of the local authority. So first of all, every local authority shall mandatory to include a chapter on DRR in their developmental plan in consultation with the DM plan. So it should cover preparedness, mitigation, response, and rehabilitation, and address it within its jurisdiction. Then second one, it should be the responsibility of the local authority to mobilize community for assistance and formation of civil defense. So the third one, the local authority shall ensure effective coordination between non-governmental organization and civil society for disaster relief, response, and reconstruction in their administrative boundary. And fourth one, it shall be the responsibility of the local authority to assist the government in loss estimation and damage. And just I wanted to point out the final one, that is the local authorities shall in their annual development plan allocate necessary funds for the disaster management from their own fund. So these all 5 points are, I just got the experience from 2018 and 19 flood and landslide. So this is what I just want to point out.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I would appreciate if you send that point, although we have noted and we have recorded also. However, if you can send these points for the consideration, and we will.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you very much. Now we will have a quick comments from Professor Pradeep Sahni. He's looking into disaster management and also that disaster public governance. So how he sees that the kind of deliberations which is going on and specific recommendations on this, the deliberation which is going on for the amendment of the Act. Please, Professor Sahni, if you are there.
Yeah, thank you very much, Santosh. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much. And first of all, I must compliment NIDM, your executive director, and you for organizing such an important meet. In fact, I was just looking at it and feeling good about it, that how over the period of time we have passed through and the disaster management in India has taken the shape. I mean, some of us are testimony to the fact when people had not even known about disaster management in that varying a manner as we have started coming now about it. In those particular days, I got an opportunity to work with Mr. Anil Sinha. And of course, Vinod Menon, I could see him over here, and you. We all had been working, and when Vinod Sharma was looking after the things in IIPA. Over the period of time, what one finds is that we have covered a good part and probably in a good manner as well. Nevertheless, my experience for disaster management in India and the role of NDMA has been doing really very well about it, but I got an opportunity to work in a disaster capacity building project at the Government of India level, which was spread over in 11 states in the country. And NDMA sponsored project it was, which was there by NDMA and IGNU. What I noticed over there was that there is probably a gap, a big gap, which is there between the theory and the practice. when it comes to doing the things when there is a non-disaster or when there is a comfortable period, we don't have that kind of the seriousness of the purpose, and this is for sure. Despite efforts which were being made by the NDMA, we didn't get the kind of the support which was required to be provided by the district administration and the district agencies which are involved thereupon. A gentleman was commenting that, well, the response period should not be taken care of by NDMA. And then what NDMA should take care of? The things which are over there in place, those things can probably be of a greater premium if the concerned stakeholders work hand in gloves with each other. The pandemic and the role which has been played by various agencies, including the health and the paramedic people and the police organizations and so on, it really proves that, well, India is second to none, and we have dealt with it in a good manner. We can improve it further, provided we are able to make people to lay emphasis upon the preparedness, and people are there to mean business. Otherwise, the things will go topsy-turvy. All good heads which are there and which are contributing, and probably this is what we have learned out of this COVID situation, or what we have gained out of this COVID situation, is that so many people you have been able to get across, and all the people, they are able to make such a valid kind of the contribution. I am sure the viewpoints which have been expressed by Krishna Vatsa, by Anil, by Mr. Srivastava, and Mr. Rai, of course, from Bihar, all these will pave the way for a better kind of the Disaster Management Act. The Act, howsoever good we may make it, the Act would not be able to bring forth the positive aspects unless and until it is being implemented. And for the implementation, it is required that all concerned, they play their role in a committed manner. I only have to add on to this only to this an extent that, well, when we find that there is the two members of NDMA are involved in the Disaster Management Act review and the amendments to be brought forth over there, these amendments will again be in keeping with the need of the hour, but nevertheless, no amendment or no addition to the Act can be fructifying unless and until we are able to implement it in a proper manner, and whereby we are able to do all those kinds of the hiccups which stand so far as the coordinated approach is concerned. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for bringing those points and highlighting and on the implementation. Now, this is a great point, and implementation, and this we are grappling with the gaps which you are highlighting. What is the theory and the practice, and whatever is given in the law, and how we have not been able to go further. Now, this is the time when we look at the legal person. Again, I'm requesting whether Ministry of Law is there. Additional Secretary, she was there in the morning. She is already logged in, but I don't know. Are you able to listen to me, madam? Probably she is not here. Any other person from the law who is there? I think. Yeah, can you deliberate, Priya, very quickly in the specific one, since you have done a PhD on the Disaster Management Act?
So there are two very important things when we talk about amendments to this Act. And first thing is, why exactly do we need amendments? And why do we want to disturb the fabric of an Act which is there since around 15 years? So the first thing is, we need to be very careful that what we want to achieve is not present either in explicit manner or implicit manner in the Act. So explicit would be what is clearly stated, and implicit is what you can understand by interpretation. So which means we need to look at and find out some blatant absurdity due to which what we want to achieve has become impossible. So we will have to disturb the fabric of the Act to be able to achieve that thing. So in that also, when we are talking about amendments, we need to stick to the spirit of the Act. We stated in the preamble. Then there's one more thing we need to be very careful about when we are talking about amendments. That is, the way Disaster Management Act has been drafted, it is basically a skeleton legislation. So if we are expecting too much from the word of law, then somewhere we are trying to mislead ourselves. Whenever we look at a skeleton legislation, more flesh has to be provided by rules and regulations, which are to come later on within a particular time frame. So most of the things this means most of the things can be settled by way of rules or regulations or say circulars or guidelines. So, and we have specific provisions relating to rules regulations in the Act itself, that is in section 75 and section 78. So there's a lot which we could have done by way of explanation to this skeleton legislation and provide flesh to it, something which did not happen in a time-bound manner. There is one more issue, and that is insofar as the DM Act is concerned, it got utilized to much extent because of the first pan-India disaster we faced, that is COVID-19. So before that, in fact, the level of dissemination of information about Act itself was very poor. So these things are, this is something which becomes very visible. The apathy is visible if we look at the Trishur collector case. So I believe most of the people are unaware of the case wherein the Trishur collector, she made it a point during Kerala floods to unbreak the locks of bar room, which she could have very easily done under Section 34 of Disaster Management Act. Now, none of the lawyers was aware of Disaster Management Act. So they did not know what to do when the collector simply entered into the bar room, because she wanted to keep the relief supplies there. So level of dissemination of information about the Act itself is very poor. Then most of the streamlining which we have done under the Act is something which we did only after the Gaurav Bansal flood case came up and Swaraj Abhiyan dot cases came up, and then the matter was handled by the Supreme Court. Then suddenly rules and rules came up at the state level, and suddenly the executive committees and other committees came into action. So somewhere we have been very liberal when it comes to implementation of the Act, something which is not warranted. So the premise which I would like to bring up is we are going ahead with talks of amendment to an Act which is by far very underutilized, and in an Act in which dissemination of information regarding existence of the Act itself has been very poor. So we should not.
Thank you very much, Priya, for giving this insight. One is that many rules and this regulations to be brought to strengthen the Act instead of going for the large amendment, and also that dissemination and information about the Act itself is very, very important. Thank you very much. Okay, please.
One more thing. So as I said, we should not be very hasty. We should not be in favor of hasty amendments when other alternatives are available. Then there is one more thing which I would like to propose. When we are talking about explaining or examining things by way of rules, regulations, guidelines, we need to be very careful while choosing the sort of way we define or the definition. So we need a very fine balance between the inclusive and exclusive definitions. A slight mistake would result into a big blunder because the current approach of Supreme Court is right-based. So considering the current right-based approach of Supreme Court, we need to be very careful about the definitions and other things.
Thank you. Thank you very much for bringing this. And Dr. Vatsa also highlighted right to life as a basic premise of this law, and this Act is there. Thank you very much, Dr. Priya. Now we have we will deliberate 5 to 7 minutes in terms of financing. Dr. Vatsa had highlighted in the beginning itself, and then we will have a response, NDRF and the quickly on, we have finance person. Can you suggest something specific that what are the things to be included in the, as in the context of financing, disaster management and recovery and reconstruction, Dr. Vatsa highlighted. Mr. George and other team who is there from the finance and insurance department?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Santosh. Of course, there is a silver line in things because of what we are seeing in two major things. One is about the 15th Finance Commission recommendation about something positive on the insurance side, and again another point which I am happy about is about the Gujarat State Disaster Management Act, which again talks about risk transfer mechanisms, including insurance. So I think the time has come for NIDM, NDMA, and the country to build on these 2 points. First of all, it is something worked in Gujarat, and we are conceptually we are there with risk transfer mechanisms, including insurance, micro insurance, risk pooling. We have to see and we have to find out how much we can use the power of this, because this is clearly it is an ex ante mechanism which would keep us in good stead. So we should, and again, it is something which is accepted world over. I mean, all the progressive countries in the world are using the power of insurance for risk transfer, and which is the in thing. And even the government of India has through various mechanisms like the Fasal Bima Yojana or even the Ayushman Bharat, they are also endorsing the power. They're also using the power of insurance in managing risk, which is the sovereign risk as well as the individual risk. So when it comes to disaster management, disaster risk transfer also, I feel, as I was talking already in the Finance Commission, again and again with NDMA on various occasions, I would re-endorse the stand that we should have that focus once again. And this time we should make a specific provision for looking at pandemic situations also. And also the third thing which I would like to flag is about man-made disasters. Because sometimes, you see on many occasions, we are seeing man-made disasters, but I don't know whether we have given a serious thought to that and make specific provisions for that. We are seeing situations where some mishandling happens in a factory, and then people lose their life and things. We are seeing something in Vizag recently. If you look at it, there is residual empowerment, everything is included. But what I'm talking about is about specific empowerment, specific focuses on this kind of thing, so that NDMA and NIDM can look into all this. NDMA specifically can look into all this, because wherever there is a man-made disaster, also what is to be done. Thank you. That is from my side.
To add on something, or is it good enough for the recommendation from the finance on the finance? Anybody else would like to add on? Okay. So now we will have.
If you allow, I will like to add just one point.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. There are certain things which, when it comes to disaster management, what we have seen that especially the reinsurance company are doing a lot of work globally on that. And we have seen that pandemic was considered as one of the biggest threat for India in 2015's Lloyd's City Risk Index. But nowhere we have taken it seriously. Otherwise, we would have been much more prepared to face this kind of situation. So I think that learning from the best practices of different sector will always help. And when it comes to any disaster, the financing become very important. Mrs. Priya discussed about Gaurav Bansal case. The reason why he committed suicide was because of economic slowdown. That is not direct cause, but it is indirectly the proximate cause was the pandemic. So even these kind of aspects we need to look at whenever we are talking about pandemic.
Thank you, Dr. Archana, while highlighting the private sector strength in terms of the study of Lloyd, which you have mentioned. About the risk index is talking about is the top priority was there, is the top in the ranking, but it's got somehow overlooked. So anyway, now we will have, thank you very much, a quick segment on the civil society group. And the civil society would like to say something on the entire deliberations, where you wish to specifically add civil society. As Dr. Vatsa also highlighted and everybody is saying that community empowerment is needed, and along with the community it should go, harmonize with the community, the act should harmonize. What is your specific recommendations for this? Civil society group. Anybody from SEEDS or anybody from this Christian Aid, and they were there, they are there. Anyway, so at this point of time, I would like to have a kind of a what Mr. Kamal Kishore had to say something in the beginning, and if I request him to say something, and before I go to Shri, please, Shri K.M. Singh ji, and before that, Kamal Kishore ji, are you there?
Yes, very much there. Thank you, Professor Santosh. This has been a very useful discussion. I have been rigorously taking notes of what you said. We have a lot of earlier material to draw upon, the work of the task force as well. And I think there are 4 or 5 big things which are coming up. Of course, there will always be a challenge to what all areas can go inside the Act and what is a subject of rules and regulations, which must be drafted in a time-bound manner, as Mr. Anderson was saying. So I think that all will have to be taken. The 4 or 5 big issues that are coming up is one, almost everyone talked about the whole question of how to use the Act to empower the local level. I think a number of speakers said that. Mr. Anderson said that. Kerala had a full presentation on that. And there was Mr. P. N. Rai also talked about it. So that is one big thing which is coming up, that not just DDMA, but DDMA and how to be used for strengthening local level systems. The second thing which is coming up is to see how we can broaden the base of actors. There is this whole thing of academia, research, NGO, police, volunteers. So how do we sort of have their role sort of articulated in the Disaster Management Act? The third point, which again came up several times, is the question of penal provisions of the Act, whether the offences are committed under the Act should be possible offences, or we should leave them the way it is. So that's another point that we deliberate on. There is the issue of broadening the impacts. There was mention of how do we take into account the livestock and animals, their safety, their well-being. They are also the assets. The other point, the last one, is how do we act to advance the notion of better assessment of risk, some role for response mechanisms. So there's a lot for us to digest and reflect on and see how we can reflect that in the company's work. They're very mindful for defining an idea to undertake this exercise of organizing this consultation, and all the very eminent senior people in this room, we have easily 1,000 years of experience of disaster management. So we have to use all of that and basically use that for the work of the company. It's a challenging task. We also have to be very careful. Dr. Priya Somi talked about the inclusive and exclusive aspects of it. every word that is in the amended act has to be read very carefully and take a full view of the implications that we have for the last plan. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kamal Kishore. I would just request you to stay on with 7 minutes with us, so that I'll hear also two more important this response when we are talking about. Finally, we have Mr. Sengar from NDRF. Mr. Sengar, would you like to mention, before I request Sri KM Singh ji to deliberate, and then Mr. Vinod Menon, you please, can you say something?
Quickly, 1 or 2 points without much ado. I'll just request that nomenclature of NDRF creates a little bit of confusion in the minds of people, because once it has been used for response force, other place it has been used for response fund. So in case of fund, maybe it can be substituted by National Relief Fund, so that there is no confusion in that mind. And secondly, STRF also we need to work upon, because as far as I know, there is no mention of STRFs in the Act. And for improving the response at the state level, maybe we can have a characteristic policy, incentivize the states which are performing well, maybe by earmarking a small portion of STRFs that is funded. Maybe a small portion for better performing states, and those who are not performing, we may maybe think of some other option. And this question may be posed to maybe Finance Commission, or maybe incorporated in the guidelines. And for complementarity in functions of civil defense, home guard, and fire services has already been brought about by task force. Maybe this post maybe merge DGMDRF and DGCB, home guard and fire services. And legislation, of course, it's being covered, but I had a feeling that for mainstreaming DRR in various legislations, I mean, we need to work more at the state and central and different other levels. The way it has been done, I was just looking at Japan for different building standards, flood control, transportation, etc. They have incorporated various provisions in different legislations to mainstream DRR. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much for bringing the point from your side. And now we request quickly Shri KM Singh ji the time is very, very less, but he has been there for long. He has fathomed to share many things. But quickly, I would like to mention, and maybe we can carry over in the next meeting, that what he feels in the entire deliberations which happened, especially for the response, it was whether it's a cognizance, not cognizance. You have been the NDRF, and also that Mr. Sengar has suggested name should be changed. Shri KM Singh ji.
Am I audible?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Actually, I have so many points to mention. NDRF will become today my last priority, because I have mother. So I don't know whether I will be able to cover today.
You can leave NDRF, sir. You can talk about others points.
Let me first talk about other points. First point is that I very strongly feel that there is a major gap in the Disaster Management Act 2005. That in the definition, it mentions only about target group as human being and property. Livestock or animal is not there. And if you recall, in NIDM in 2016, we have a national workshop where 96 veterinarians from all over the country came, and we made some good recommendation. Because the point is, I call it omission because India is an agrarian society. Livelihood of 2/3 of the population depends upon animals and livestock, and neither it finds mention in definition nor in the NEC or in the DDM anywhere. Animal Husbandry Department has no role whatsoever in the Disaster Management Act, notwithstanding the fact that even Sendai disaster framework of risk reduction has clearly in priority 3 mentioned about strengthening and protection of livestock as a livelihood issue. Now we are thinking of livelihood issue of an agrarian country. How can we miss that? So my first recommendation is that, and we have done a lot of work on that. My when we made the recommendation to include livestock in the definition, the response informally of MHA was that livestock is covered as in property. Now in Uttarakhand, Uttarakhand High Court gave a judgment in 2016 August, which clearly mentions that animal is not property and animal is a living entity with all rights. So the court ruling is there, Supreme Court ruling is there, animal is not property. So if animal is not property, animal is not human being, then where does it mention? So my recommendation number one is that the definition livestock must be mentioned. Number two, in the NEC, Animal Husbandry Secretary should be there. Similarly, in the State Executive Committee and in the DDMA also, you have the police superintendent and you have the health, the civil surgeon, the animal husbandry doctor should be there. That's one. Second is, I'm very happy that in the concept note of NIDM, the word road accident has been mentioned. Now, we recently had in February a national workshop on road accidents and emergency medical management. Now, the point is that I just want to mention that the United Nations 2030 agenda for sustainable development, they had set an agenda that by 2020, the total number of deaths by road accidents should be reduced to half. But in the review that has been done, it says that between 1990 and 2017, while the global rate of death due to road accident increased by 8.1%, in India it increased by 58.7%. And the World Bank study says that 150,000 people, repeat, 150,000 people die in road accidents every year. Now we are in a knee-jerk reaction today, worried about pandemic in which 20,000 people have died, or 26/11 happened and a few hundred people died. 150,000 people dying every year. And why? Among other things, everywhere internationally we are making the highways. The emergency medical management is seamlessly integrated. The telephone booth collection, ambulance, nearby hospital, so that within golden hour the body's injured person can be reached. Here we are just making highways and highways with no emergency medical management. And the figure is that while the highways constitute only 6% of the roads, the total death out of 150,000 in highway, it is 60%. So 90,000 people are dying every day on highway. And the ministry had recently announced that in the next 5 years, 15 trillion rupees are going to be spent on highway construction. So more highways, more deaths, and nobody is bothered. So my recommendation is, number one, highway accidents should come as a policy matter in the disaster management framework and NDM. And number two, that in disaster management we say that no development can be sustainable unless disaster risk reduction is ingrained in the developmental work from planning stage. And something like 10% to 20% is earmarked for that. Similarly, my recommendation is that in future, in any highway construction, at least 10% of the highway construction work should be meant for emergency medical management facility so that casualties are brought down. These are my two major things. Number three is that we talk about pandemic and all. The point is that domain expertise is also very important. You include that, but if you recall in the first NDMA 2005 to 10, the second 2010 to 14, we had a very, very qualified medical doctor in the NDMA. And with health ministry, whether it was Ebola or H1N1, they played a very key role. Today, we have no domain expert, no health person from health in the NDMA. But more than that, today we are worried about that. But something like if Bhopal, a chemical tragedy happens or nuclear thing happens, in the NDMA today we have in the first NDMA, we had one person who was member, who was the former director of Baba Islamic Research Center. He was a Padma Shri. Today, at the member level, there is no domain expertise. So that expertise is very important. Thirdly, I would like to mention that when we, in the NDMA in 2006, for the first time, we met Professor Kalam, the then Vice President of India. He very rightly said that, General Vish, let me tell you, the NDMA will not be successful unless you are empowered. And the fact is, a lot of work has been done, but NDMA was never empowered. And that is one problem, which is, and that's why the guidelines and all so much has been done, but it has not seen the light of the day. Coming to NDRF, I would like to mention that the task force had very clearly mentioned about NDMA. In page 50, I will quote, the NDMA has successfully discharged the responsibility assigned to it under Section 45, introducing the concept of proactive deployment of the NDRF, which has been the success story of NDMA. So, all activities of NDRF related to a specialist response should continue with the NDMA. And in the 8.6.1 recommendation, task force has mentioned that the NDRF has done quite well under the existing legal framework. There is no need to amend it, the existing provisions related to NDRF in the DM Act. So, but I don't want to go in detail, but let me tell you that MHA has hands full, and for them, law and order, internal security is very important. And initial few years in the NDMA, I had to discuss with the NDMA, MHA, that NDRF should not be deployed for law and order duties, but they were already diverted. It is because NDRF remained with the NDMA that it come up as a professional force, one of the best disaster response force in the world. And my recommendation would be that that should not be tinkered. NDRF should remain with the NDMA. Then the last point I would like to mention, that there are 3 levels of disaster, level 1, level 2, level 3. NDRF is for level 3. But today NDRF is being used for even a car when it goes into a nala or a borewell accident. The point is, my vision is 4-tier response mechanism. NDRF is national level. State level SDRF. SDRF has not come up well. SDRF, though nothing has been mentioned about the act in the SDRF. It was the concept which we started in the NDMA in a DGP conference, and gradually it has been informal. But there is no mention of SDRF, State Disaster Response Force, in the act. That must find mention, and that will be the state level. And then at the district level, besides police and all, Civil Defense Act, I was given the charge, I revamped the Civil Defense Act. Civil Defense Act, Revamped Act has been given a specific role in the disaster management. The Civil Defense Act was also amended and all that. But after that, civil defense has not really been integrated with the disaster response framework of the country. The point is, community capacity building is very important, and civil defense is the best organization for community capacity building. So Civil Defense Amended Act should be implemented in the disaster response framework. And lastly, the community response. That is very important. There is community awareness program, NDRF is doing in a small way, but this has to be done in an institutionalized way, somebody given responsibility, so that community awareness program, community capacity building program of TOT and all is done in a systematic way. Thank you.
You have made many recommendations here, and government has recognized your contribution and conferred you the Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose Award. So we compliment and congratulate you at this forum. This is the great service to the nation you have done. Thank you so much, sir, for giving this. Now we have, sir, you have given a certain recommendation. We have Mr. Raju from the legal ministry. So can I have a quick, we are just with the permission of all the delegates, we are just extending it to 20 minutes from the original schedule. Please remain with us, and so that we can conclude today's meeting with your in the presence of all of you. So may I request Mr. Raju to join us, and then we will also request Mr. Menon and finally Joint Secretary Disaster Management from the Ministry of Home Affairs, Mr. Jindal, before we request concluding remark from the NIDM. Please, Mr. Raju, are you there? Mr. Raju, are you there? Probably he's not here, legal department. May I request now Shri Vinochan Menon to quickly give few specific comments so that we can move ahead. Mr. Menon, please.
Are you able to hear me?
Yeah. Mr. Menon is former member of the NDMA. Please.
Just wanted to mention that, Anil Sinha mentioned perception management. If you really look at, what is happening right now in the country in terms of the COVID response, we have actually not really been able to really do that paradigm shift, which we talked about in 2005 in the Disaster Management Act. And that paradigm shift was essentially strengthening preparedness, strengthening, emergency response capacities, and also looking at disaster mitigation, mainstreaming disaster management in development planning. So I would like to emphasize that particular aspect, if you really start rewinding what is the situation in January 2020, and then look at what has happened in the last 5 months, I would like to see that institutional mechanisms have not really performed the roles which they were expected to play. And I would like to make that as a submission, and we would like to look at it. NDMA, SDMAs, and the DDMAs, the role of NDMA as the apex body for national level for the disaster management in all phases of disaster management would essentially be to empower all the other stakeholders, can create an enabling environment, role of SDMAs and the DDMAs. And I think, the role of the NCMC, the National Crisis Management Committee, and the National Executive Committee of the, which is mentioned in the Disaster Management Act, we would need to really relook at the roles which have been played. Now, if you really look at the role of the National Disaster Management Authority, 15 years ago, when we were actually talking about 2005, when the National Disaster Management Authority came up after the Disaster Management Act was enacted, we were actually talking in terms of the role in coordination, the role in facilitation, and the role in empowering other stakeholders. And so if you really look at the role of the ICMR or the role of the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare in the current pandemic, I think, we are losing out on a lot of clarity which should have been there, whether it is in the question of testing, whether it's in the question of recovery, whether it's in the question of creating capacities for, ICUs and ventilators or PPE kits and others. It's a big issue in terms of, really using that lockdown period, to be announced when you really have an opportunity to ramp up your preparedness. In terms of mobilizing PPE kits, mobilizing masks, and mobilizing, ventilators and so on. That, unfortunately, we've lost out. And that's why, we cannot really talk in terms of the flattening of the curve. We are not even seeing the peak of the curve. So, I think there are a lot more has to be discussed. Now, I think I'll come specifically to the recommendations, what we need to really look at for affirmative action. Most important that we would need to look at potentially expanding the role of definition of disaster management to include war, exigencies which are happening because of external aggression, and also communal riots, and civil unrest which can happen. Because I think, we need to factor in these as most important potential threats which are there, which we need to address. Now, in terms of excluded groups like migrant workers and fisherfolk and SC, ST, OBC, minorities, elderly, disabled, transgender, people with palliative care, I think, the Disaster Management Act, if it has to enable these excluded groups to be getting services, we are not really seeing that. For instance, if somebody has to go through an organ transplant in the last 5 months, many of them have been neglected. What is known as, the surgeries which were left out from the hospitals. So how do you really bring that, excluded section? So grievance redressal mechanisms. I would suggest maybe a 4-digit helpline for vulnerable sections to reach, institutions at the national level, at the state level, and at the district level would be very useful. Now, I would also like to mention that the clarity in terms of financing disaster management response, the confusions regarding the Prime Minister's National Response Fund or the Relief Fund, NRF, PM-NRF and the PM CARES Fund, we need to have some clarity and we need to have something. And I think, we would need to really look into that aspect of financing. I would also like to mention one point which is important, which I think should be brought in the discussions. The death of COVID-19 patients declared as due to pneumonia or cardiac arrest or comorbidities and not eligible for any compensation is not really correct. If they are COVID-19 patients, you would need to really see that they are actually recorded as COVID-19 deaths. And this is something which I think as a part of Leave No One Behind, and especially the vulnerable sections, we need to really factor that in. I would like to also just mention the need for strengthening financial inclusion, the DBTs, the direct beneficiary transfer, to Jan Dhan accounts and things like that for the 2,000 rupees or 1,000 rupees. I think, we need to really have some role for the disaster management authorities at the national level, state level, and the district level to really look into that. In terms of the confusion regarding the use of the Disaster Management Act and the Epidemic Act, as amended in 2020, I think we need to have some clarity in terms of what the Act and the legislation should actually be doing. In the changing times, we need to have clarity, and that clarity is not really seen whether it is a question of transfer of people, travel of people across states, whether what is the role lockdown, 5 versions of the lockdown and 2 versions of this unlock, and the roles of the section 6 to subsection 1, and the role of the section 2, section 10, subsection 2, and section 2 and subsection 1, 10 to 1 and 6 to 1. We need to really look into that provision as to what empowers the National Executive Committee to issue directions to the states and to districts. Should it be the role of the National Disaster Management Authority or the role of the NEC? And finally, I would also like to mention that I see the letterheads of the National Disaster Management Authority mentioning the Ministry of Home Affairs. This question had come up several times in many meetings, including the meetings at the level where, the Government of India level, in the 5 years that we were there in the National Disaster Management Authority, and the others would be aware of it. The role of the National Disaster Management Authority as the apex body chaired by the Prime Minister of India should actually not be diluted, and it should actually have that role if it has to have a level playing field with the states and the districts. Thank you. Thank
you very much, Professor Menon, for highlighting specifically on the couple of recommendations. And I would also request you to kindly send your recommendation in writing to us. That would help us in incorporating in the report. Thank you very much. Now I would request Sri Sanjeev Kumar Jindal, who is the Joint Secretary of the DM Division Disaster Management and Relief Commissioner of the country. Sri Sanjeev Jindal, would you like to mention some of the things you have listened to all the deliberations? So I need your point before I request Mr. Bindal to come in. Sri Sanjeev Kumar Jindal.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Professor.
Yes, sir, please.
Am I audible?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Perhaps my video is not there due to some technical reason. Anyway, today it has been very useful conversation from various experts from different sectors of life, and this was the purpose of stakeholder consultation. And one of the speakers I mentioned that the views of the states and stakeholders to be taken into account, and that's why we had this conference, keeping this in mind. So we have a very range of suggestions, recommendations, starting from to act have to be very explicit, and somebody is saying that it has to be very implicit. Anyway, the recommendation will be taken into consideration by the committee, and we welcome suggestions in writing also on specific recommendation as well, though there have been talks about what should be done. And I would request if you can suggest a specific provision in the law which we can think of including into that. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much for being with us for whole of the discussion, and nicely submitted that if anything is required and specific to the Act, proviso of the Act should be submitted to in writing so that we can submit it to the committee for the further consideration. Thank you very much for being with us. Now if we summarize the whole thing in terms of that, one thing which I would like to announce that we are still into the discussion, and the 6th of this July, we are having the second round. Maybe some new person would join, but you all are kindly invited to please join if you are willing, and still you think that your point has been left out and not been covered, and you did not get the opportunity to speak much, or the second round you did not get. Please join us on the 6th. That would be better. And then by the time, I would request you to kindly, the entire delivery, Mr. Kamal Kishore has already mentioned that what are the points of the takeaway of this meeting. And Mr. Jindal also mentioned that these are the things to be taken and how we can carry forward and submit it to the rest of the this recommendation to the committee. The whole deliberation started with the Shri Krishna Vatsa is also mentioned that why we are doing this discussion, and it was flagged very rightly that COVID-19 has given a new challenges, new opportunities, new learning, and a lot of kind of exercise both at the national level and down at the state level and at the community level. How it encompasses everyone and how it make to be very, very inclusive. And the kind of deliberations and the kind of thoughtful insights have been given by all the distinguished delegates. We are really grateful to all of you. And this way that it has come up, and our challenge is much more to actually pin down all the recommendations, although the recording would be there, and submit it to MHA and also further to the committee. I once again, as a moderator, thank a lot, and I extend my heartfelt thanks to all of you for being with us, and extended time also you've been there. I'm sorry for that extended time, for just 20 minutes we shot up, but it should not have been there. But I'm sorry for that, for holding you back on the Saturday. But I request Shri Major General Manoj Kumar Bindal to kindly give the closing remarks, and we finish up. We close this session. Thank you very much. Major General Manoj Kumar Bindal, Executive Director, NIDM, please.
Thank you, Professor Santosh Kumar. Today we have covered a lot of grounds and a lot of varied subjects have been spoken. Some things have come out loud and clear. That is the definition of the Act. Disasters needs to be certainly worked upon. The institutional framework needs to be strengthened and empowered. The role of DDMAs has come out loud and clear by each and every speaker. And the role below the DDMA, which I had referred to right in the beginning, has also come out loud and clear. So there have been a number of issues like financing, how to transfer the risk transfer. Then there was a question in the chat box about disaster loss and needs assessment, PDNA. That also should form part of the DMA, which was not discussed today, but we'll next webinar we'll discuss that. And specific provisions which you feel should be included, like what Jindal ji said. Finally, we have to come down to chapters given in the DMA 2005. And in that, we have to remove, amend, correct, or add a few lines here and there to make it the way it should be with the deliberations. So finally, it will come down to chapter-wise recommendations. So in the next webinar, before that, we will be combining or writing down all these points, and we will write it in the form in which the present Disaster Management Act is planned, and it will be chapter-wise, so that we have now specific agenda for the next webinar, that in which chapter, what needs to be included and where. So this particular thing will be mailed to you before the next webinar as to whatever were the deliberations today, and we will be combining it with the task force report of 2013. So that you have any suggestions, you may mail it back to us, and all those who will be joining us on 6th, we can deliberate further on that. And there is a framework on which we built upon on 6th, rather than repeat some of the issues which have already been spoken about. I thank each and every participant for being patient and listening to the whole thing. Number of participants could not get time to give out their points today. And but I assure you, in the next webinar on 6th, we will certainly invite you to give out your points. So I again thank everyone, the members of the NDMA, former members, all the dignitaries who have been instrumental in the HPC last task force and who are currently serving in various important appointments, who will be instrumental in amending this particular act, for being a part of this webinar. Thank you very much. Over to you, Professor Santosh.
Thank you very much, General Bindal, for being the part of this entire deliberations, and you gave this opportunity. I extend my heartfelt thanks to you and all the delegates, former member, the task force members, and also that member of the NDMA, former member NDMA, state government, civil society group, private sector, insurance industries, all came together to make it happen. So this is very, very important thing for us and greatest learning opportunity. I extend on behalf of my team, Dr. Anuradha Maurya, Balaji, Ms. Jacqueline, Dr. Raka, and everyone who is there in the writing reports also. I extend my heartfelt thanks to the Executive Director of the National Institute of Disaster Management, who entrusted this responsibility to me for taking this agenda forward of the discussion. And I'm sure on his behalf and on my personal behalf, and on behalf of the NDMA and the National Institute of Disaster Management and Ministry of Home Affairs, I extend my heartfelt thanks to all of you and invite you also to join us on the 6th. The time and invitation has already communicated to you. Invitation and the link, web link, will be sent to you separately. My heartfelt thanks to once again, and give me this time to close this, permission to close the discussion today, and enjoy your rest of the Saturday. We have taken half of the Saturday of yours, but please enjoy and stay healthy and stay happy. This is the wish which I wish to mention from NIDM. Thank you very much to all of you being with us and really making this as a very interesting and learning experience for all of us. Thank you very much.